Thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'm Gerard Scimeca, Chairman of CASE, Consumer Action for a Strong Economy, and we're the free market voice of America's consumers. You may have seen us in your emails once or twice. We're excited today to share some very important information to help bring some balance and clarity to the discussion on public health, specifically as it pertains to the report released by the MAHA Commission, Make America Healthy Again, chaired by JFK Jr. Many of you know the commission was established with the goal of identifying the root causes of deteriorating child health and made many sweeping conclusions and recommendations with the intention of influencing public policy on food and nutrition. Such policies, if enacted, would, of course, have enormous consequences for consumers and across the entire economy. Unfortunately, what we learned after seeking feedback from multiple stakeholders was the MAHA report fell disastrously short of President Trump's executive order to restore gold standard science to the federal government, that it was largely based on flawed analysis, bias, misinterpretations, and conclusions that failed to meet the basic threshold of scientific rigor. It further lacked transparency by making sweeping public policy recommendations without the accepted practice of public notice and comment, which of course could have widespread consequences on public trust in government-led scientific data. We find it very concerning, as do most Americans, when they learn of the MAHA Commission's process, that the federal government would produce such a consequential report on such a critical subject as our nation's food supply without that needed rigor. So we engaged the assistance of Dr. Kern, a very respected nutrition scientist and professor at San Diego State University with expertise in public health, food science, and clinical research. We wanted an independent scientific review of the public comments submitted to CASE in response to the MAHA report. And we're thankful that he is joining us today, this afternoon, to share his findings and provide the science and evidence-based research and data that the MAHA report failed to deliver. So, Dr. Kern.
Thanks a bunch. So I'm happy to be here. I was concerned when I came across the MAHA report that there were inaccuracies, and I saw the news stories about wild inaccuracies and how people were misquoted, how some of the references didn't match up with what the researchers actually had put together. So I was happy to be involved with this process. So I appreciate being invited by CASE to do this and to help spread the word how important truth is. That's my main goal, is that people are use the truth when talking about nutrition and foods so that we don't have so much misinformation out there in the world. I really am concerned that, especially given the penchant for this administration to have executive orders that might have negative consequences for the citizens of the United States, I'm afraid that they might shoot from the hip and use this information, this misinformation, to establish policies that could be untoward to American citizens from economical perspectives, from choices in foods. By lumping everybody together, all people don't have the same responses to all foods and to all food ingredients. So I was concerned, and I'm happy to help try to set some of the records straight. So some of the big topics covered in the MAHA report that they are concerned about, that they tend to get wrong, are some of the issues regarding ultra-processed foods. So if you've looked at my report, you can see that many of the items that I've discussed are about ultra-processed foods or ultra-processed food ingredients, as defined by the MAHA report. They use the NOVA classification as their default way to define ultra-processed foods. But I want to be clear, you'll see in my report that even experts don't necessarily interpret the NOVA classification the same. Not only that, when people do consume a bulk of their foods from ultra-processed foods according to the NOVA classification, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to eat an unhealthy diet. So all those things are found in my report. So let's keep in mind that ultra-processed foods are not something that everybody agrees upon the definition for. And so when I use the word ultra-processed foods, I'm using it from the perspective of the MAHA report, which they misclassify some ultra-processed foods from. In one of my issues that I discuss, you'll see that I mentioned that concerns from stakeholders include that they misclassify foods. One misclassification that they use is oils and sugar and so forth. They say that is an ultra-processed food in the MAHA report. However, the NOVA classification puts that as a class 2 food. According to NOVA, the ultra-processed food classification is class 4. So they wildly misinterpret what the NOVA classification is. I don't think these kinds of issues would have come up if the commission that either put together the report or paid to have the report written, I'm not sure how that worked out, if they would have had experts in the field of nutrition with helping to complete this report. So I'm really worried that this process doesn't match the gold standard research process that the president's executive order is called for. They're not using gold standard research in producing this report. And then if they're going to use this report for upcoming policy, then it's going to be based on non-gold standard information. So some of the key targets in the MAHA report are ultra-processed foods, seed oils that they consider ultra-processed foods, but the NOVA classification doesn't, high fructose corn syrup, and alternative sweeteners such as sucralose and aspartame and those types of things. Those are the topics that I'm most comfortable with. Any questions you might have, so feel free to ask any questions along the way. So if we want to just go issue by issue, I'm happy to do that. So the first issue in my report is the issue of the concerns of the stakeholders regarding replacing seed oils with animal fats. So there's problems with that from both perspectives. Either getting rid of seed oils might have negative health repercussions because seed oils almost invariably tend to promote better health as long as they're not eaten to excess. That's true for pretty much any component of our diet. If we overeat just about anything, it can cause harmful effects. Even water can be toxic. People have died from over-consuming water. Now, that's an extreme, but seed oils, when you look at the research, tend to be beneficial. The key component of seed oils that is the concern, according to the MAHA report, are these omega-6 fatty acids. I don't think I have time to describe the biochemistry behind different types of fatty acids, but the omega-6 fatty acids are a group of polyunsaturated fatty acids which tend to promote health benefits. They get a negative reputation, especially according to the MAHA report, based on one particular paper from the 90s that suggested that the ratio of omega-3 fatty acids to omega-6 fatty acids is what is causing the problem with health, especially from an inflammatory perspective. However, contemporary research suggests that omega-6 fatty acids are also anti-inflammatory. And the problem with the ratio indicating that there's an issue is that people tend to underconsume absolute amounts of omega-3 fatty acids that are vital to health. So it's not so much that it's the ratio that's the problem, it's the low absolute consumption of omega-3 fatty acids. So I cover that in a lot of detail in issue 1 in my report. Issue 2 is more about how these fat sources are depleted in nutrients. So the seed oils, because they come from the ground, are depleted in nutrients. That's not the case. The MAHA report suggests replacing seed oils with animal fats and specifically points out nutrients that are more rich in these seed oils than they are in animal fats. Animal fats tend not to be a good contributor of these nutrients, such as phytosterols. Phyto itself, that term phytosterol refers to plants. These are sterol molecules that are coming from plants. Animal fats tend to be rich in animal sterols, and the key animal sterol is cholesterol. So if we replace seed oils with animal fats, we will be consuming more cholesterol and less phytosterols. Another nutrient that they are raised concern with is vitamin E. Vitamin E is primarily found in plant foods, and plant oils tend to be a particularly rich source, including the polyunsaturated fat-rich oils that are the seed oils. So that's two issues that are of major concern. Issue 3 is more about ultra-processed foods. So the issue that we should avoid consuming ultra-processed foods. One major problem that I already mentioned is that it's very hard to classify ultra-processed foods. And not all ultra-processed foods are equally healthful or non-healthful. So there are some ultra-processed foods that would be considered particularly healthful. If we lump them all together and we put strict regulations on consumption of ultra-processed foods, we may be missing out on key nutrients in our diet that could be contributing to good health. That doesn't mean that all ultra-processed foods are healthful, and we really should avoid consuming excess amounts of less healthful ultra-processed foods. But for the MAHA report to try to infer that they know which ultra-processed foods are unhealthful is a stretch, especially since the commission did not include any registered dietitians and very few competent nutrition scientists. Speaking of that, it seems that the MAHA report relies mostly on influencers and less qualified individuals for their information. So the MAHA movement consists mostly of people who are not registered dietitians or nutrition scientists. So that's a major concern, that they're getting their information from sources that don't provide the highest quality information. Issue 4 in my report is a topic about pesticides in foods. That's not particularly my area of understanding, my key area of understanding, but I was able to compare the MAHA report to the recommendations from the Environmental Protection Agency, and I was able to point out the inconsistencies between the MAHA report and what our own administration is already saying through the Environmental Protection Agency. Issue 5 was about high fructose corn syrup. There's a lot of misinformation about high fructose corn syrup, and I've pointed out just a few of the problems with the high fructose corn syrup misinformation. One thing that seems to be happening with the MAHA movement is the movement to replace high fructose corn syrup with regular sugar that would come from cane sugar or perhaps from sugar beets. Well, there really is very little distinction between high fructose corn syrup and table sugar in the scientific literature. So that is a problem. There's some very minor nuances, and I've done some of the research to show that sugar and high fructose corn syrup should not be terms used interchangeably. But most people don't realize that there are even 3 major versions of high fructose corn syrup that should not be used as interchangeable terms. And they differ by especially the amount of fructose and glucose that are present. Another issue that we hear about is that we should replace our food consumption with our soft drinks with sugar versus high fructose corn syrup. The problem with that is that within a couple weeks after a can of or bottle of sucrose produced soft drink is produced, the acid that's in that can or bottle will hydrolyze or break down the sucrose into its 2 corresponding monosaccharides, which are fructose and glucose. And you'll end up with a 50-50 mixture of fructose and glucose, which is almost the same as the 2 most common high fructose corn syrup varieties. One has 42% fructose, the other has 55% fructose. 50-50 is right in between. So there's virtually no difference between a sugar-produced soft drink and one produced with high fructose corn syrup. Maybe more importantly, the research that's available suggests that if we're eating fructose at a level that is consistent with the typical American diet, it probably doesn't have negative health repercussions, as long as the person's not overeating food in general. If they're overeating calories, then eating any extra calories will be potentially detrimental. So as long as the person's not overeating calories, eating the amount of fructose that is typically eaten will not have negative health repercussions, according to the research that's available now. What I really would like to do is have a call for more research on ingredients that we find in these so-called ultra-processed foods, including high fructose corn syrup, table sugar, oils, the alternative sweeteners. All these things probably deserve more research before we shoot from the hip and try to come up with policies. Okay, the sixth issue that I brought up in my report is the reliance on epidemiological research and especially narrative reviews for the information that was in the MAHA report. This goes against the president's executive order to have gold standard research directing the policies that are set by the administration. We really need to use gold standard information. One major concern I have about the MAHA report is that it's coinciding with what the secretary is calling for as a rewrite of the dietary guidelines for Americans. It's really important to understand that the dietary guidelines for Americans are produced through consultation with leading nutrition scientists, and the MAHA report was not. So if they end up changing the dietary guidelines for Americans to write it in a way that resembles the MAHA report, then I'm very concerned with how that might have repercussions for child nutrition, for adult nutrition, for our nation's economy, for our food choices, and so forth. And then the seventh issue was about the artificial sweeteners and how it might negatively impact our gut microbiome. So this is based on very little research and on only a small portion of the alternative sweeteners that are available. There's no real reason to believe that all alternative sweeteners would have similar effects either within our gut or within our bodies. So to extrapolate small studies of a limited number of these alternative sweeteners to suggest that all alternative sweeteners have negative repercussions is definitely misleading. And for those sweeteners where there is a little bit of research that suggests there might be alterations in the gut microbiome, we need to do more research to understand what it means and to clear up the area and to have a better idea of how to interpret the research. Okay, so those are the items that I've covered in my report. I did just want to kind of summarize with some thoughts of my own. One thought of my own is that it seems to me that the MAHA report should be recommending that consumers get better information from trained professionals. And the best trained professionals in the nutrition world are registered dietitians. I didn't notice any call for consumers reaching out to registered dietitians for their best information. Maybe government policy should make information from registered dietitians more accessible to the population. I also wanted to point out that the MAHA report seems to be based more on emotions and not evidence, and you cannot equate the two. Just because somebody has a fear of a particular food or a particular ingredient does not make that a scientifically established fear. It's an emotion more than a true fear. I'm also concerned that blanket restrictions that might come out of the strategy produced from this assessment could end up having widespread repercussions for school lunch programs, for all sorts of policies in the United States. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want the administration's tendency to fire from the hip to have negative repercussions for American citizens. And then lastly, I just want to say for all of these ingredients and foods that are pointed out in the report, the most important thing to keep in mind, and the thing that maybe registered dietitians could best help people with, is that whether or not there's going to be any negative repercussions might depend on who is eating the food and at what dose they're eating it. So if we don't think about those things, then we're going to miss the mark and we're going to mislead the consumer. Those are my thoughts. So please feel free to ask some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kern. So you were talking about cane sugar and the MAHA's report about ultra processed foods, but cane sugar is pretty highly processed itself, isn't it?
Yes, and if you stick with the NOVA classification, it's a class 2 processed food, not a class 4 ultra processed food. But yes, there would be no major distinction between regular table sugar and high fructose corn syrup. So,
And did you identify any of the food substances mentioned in the MAHA report as not, say, being fully approved by the FDA or having any kind of FDA concerns or at
you
all?
know,
Or is it,
as I think back to reading the report, I don't remember any of those. Remember reading anything that there was an ingredient that has been considered by the FDA to be something that should not be available on the market.
okay. We do have a question. How can Congress support agencies in using the best available science when evaluating complex issues like diet and chronic illness?
Well, I think that Congress already does that when they establish the dietary guidelines for Americans. They seek the advice of the best scientists in the United States. And so if they continue using that type of path when they develop policies, I think that's going to be the best way for us to get the best policies. I'm not saying that all the policies that are derived from the dietary guidelines for Americans are perfect, but at least they're less imperfect than the MAHA report.
I think transparency would also be very helpful if they're going to make any kind of public policy changes to open it up for notice and comment. So experts like you can weigh in.
And when they do develop the dietary guidelines for Americans, their debates are all available through streaming online. So the information that they are sharing is widely available and transparent.
And our concern from the point of view of it's a very noble goal, obviously, to public health as well as the issue with children and their deteriorating health. When you look at the diet recommendations versus other impacts on kids like activity, portion control, balanced diets, where do you rate those? Say what you put in your body versus some of the other factors that can impact your health?
Well, yeah, for sure. One thing that we don't do well is encouraging our children to be physically active. So if we could get kids to be more physically active, then what they're eating is going to be way less important than what they're eating when they're inactive. If you're physically active, it's virtually a license to eat. You can get away with a much more liberal diet if you're adequately physically active. So that issue particularly. And then the issue of not overeating. And it doesn't seem to matter what you're overeating. If you're eating more calories than you're expending, it's probably going to have some negative health repercussions. And maybe this is where people like registered dietitians can help with these kids to make sure that they're not overeating and that they're getting adequate physical activity.
And one of the larger concerns, again, is that when a government puts something out and makes recommendations, it can tend to become conventional wisdom. And so it's adopted by agencies, it's adopted by non-government agencies, it could be adopted by states. Insurance companies will look at it. It's interesting. I don't know if it was in the full report, but salt was a big evil maybe about a decade or so ago. I don't know if it touched upon that at all. But again, it is the amount you have. But we had that food pyramid. I don't know if the food pyramid, when I was in school, is still being pushed by the FDA. But at the bottom of it, the base of it was built on bread. Like you had to have a loaf of bread every day in order to be healthy, and that's kind of out the window. So, but maybe you can. I don't know if you're.
So the food guide pyramid. The food guide pyramid was replaced with what's called My Plate, which I think is a very reasonable alternative. And My Plate still recommends that most of our, not most, the majority, the plurality, I should say, of food that we consume come from the grains group. But if you read the dietary guidelines for Americans, it suggests that half of those grains, at least half, should be whole grains rather than refined grains. So if we actually follow the dietary guidelines for Americans and my plate, then we would be eating a much healthier diet than we currently are doing.
Yeah, and again, when it becomes conventional wisdom, that impacts consumer choice and it impacts the economy to where I don't know anybody who's going to get a report from their doctor who's going to say, well, Bill, you really need to switch to cane sugar, get off that high fructose corn syrup. I mean, you just need to cut down. There's really, for the glycemic impact and calories and everything. It's as you said, fructose and glucose. There's a very marginal difference between how the body processes them, but for your overall health and for your average person, there's literally no difference to it. But the president and his I guess he's the Coke expert or Diet Coke expert. It's odd that he would be, America's farmers, we are abundant in corn. Corn is plentiful. It's inexpensive. Sugar is we don't have enough sugar here, and we have sugar quotas. Other countries have tariffs, and they have import quotas as well as they heavily subsidize their sugar industry. So not only is it more expensive, but we don't have it to the extent that we'd need it for producing Coke or other products. So we have to import it. So it doesn't, from a financial and economic standpoint, it really doesn't make sense why we would be trading corn for sugar when corn is here, sugar's over there, and it costs more, and it'll impact consumers more, and it would hurt farmers.
Yeah, well, I agree, and the distinctions between high fructose corn syrup and sugar are so minuscule that if by switching from one to the other causes economic pain for U.S. citizens, then that's definitely not right.
Well, this is a great question. I'm a farmer and very concerned that my products from soybeans are being villainized in the public discussion simply because of the MAHA report. How can farmers fight back without using too much eyes glossing over data? And that is a key thing too, where certain foods are just being, everybody's different. Everybody has different preferences. Everybody's physiology reacts differently to different nutritional requirements. And so, yeah, how do we keep things like soybeans from getting villainized and hurting our farmers?
I'm better at using data and making people's eyes gloss over, but if people just recognize that they are not the experts on foods, and when the experts say that the studies support that soybean oil has health benefits, that soy protein has health benefits, maybe they should defer to those experts and make sure that they're really experts and not just influencers.
Mm-hmm. Another question is there a role for the GAO or the HHS Inspector General in reviewing how science was cited, sourced, and presented in the MAHA report? I would say they would probably have to take that up on their own. It could be, maybe it's something that, could be, I'm not sure how they decide which reports to view. There's sometimes there's a lot of agencies have their own inspector generals where they're just kind of audited. But that's a good question, and that's something that should be brought up. I think that there was some good congressional testimony where MAHA was really, they really challenged them on a lot of, especially the phantom citations, where reporters had called up the researchers who were cited in the report, and they said, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't write this. I've never done anything like that. I wouldn't know how something like that would get into a report, but it's very concerning because it's used as a basis for these conclusions and these policy changes. So, again, that's something that,
I think that's where they really need to rely on people who are serious scientists for this, because scientists are worried about their reputation. If they put in a reference that doesn't match up with what the article actually says, that puts their reputation at risk. So if these reports were developed by people whose reputation is at risk, then I think that you would end up with better information in the report.
Overall, do you see I don't know if you have a comprehensive look at how the government tends to um, make decisions or put out evaluations on food and nutrition. Just as one example, where we get very concerned, when the government wades into areas where they may not have the expertise. I think we were talking before about, you see some of these SNAP programs that are now reducing consumers' choices on what they're able to use with their SNAP benefits. So you can argue with the SNAP program if you want, if you like it, you don't like it, but people should remember that the income tax started off only affecting 2% of the top earners, and the tax was 2%. It always starts off, oh, we're just going here, and then eventually, like with most things, there's government creep, and it winds up impacting people. So SNAP is cutting off things like in some of the states, about 7 states now are limiting what people can get on SNAP. But you'll have a government saying, who decides what exactly, is a, granola. People used to think was a very healthy food, and then they looked at the calories and the carbs and the sugars, and it wasn't as wholesome as it was advertised to be. And you have things like their energy bars that almost could be indistinguishable from a Snickers. So some things might pass and other things may not. And so the government has their toe in that water, which concerns us, again, because it'll eventually be something that impacts consumers who aren't on SNAP. When maybe again, you're if the government is prescribing certain foods, then that might wind up being policies adopted by other agencies or insurance companies that you just never know. But do you see anywhere where they have a place with evaluating the nutritional quality of foods, like with the FDA and the research they do, or do you see them overstepping their bounds at times?
Well, I definitely think there is a role for things like, for example, the FDA can, on food labels, require that the most serious allergens have to have a comment on the food label that says that this food contains this particular potential allergen, which doesn't apply to everybody across the board, but at least the people who are allergic to whatever that may be know that it's there and their awareness is raised. So I think FDA has a role for that. Maybe in a perfect world, FDA could study all the foods that are available and be able to put on the food label, this food is consumable at this dose per day for these individuals. But we'll probably never get there. Where I think the government really has a role is in funding research to find out more information about these ultra-processed foods and the ingredients that go into them. That's where they should be spending their money. It's shocking how little research is available on how sugar or high fructose corn syrup affect metabolism or health risks when it's consumed at typical levels of intake. It is extremely shocking that we are not putting money into finding out at what dose do we really end up having negative repercussions.
You talked about the bias, using the word natural. If it comes from a plant, it's good. It comes from, if it's processed, it's bad. Could you expound a little bit more on that, or where you see, that line isn't so clear and it's a little bit of a myth?
Yeah, well, that is definitely a major issue. And, I not only come from this perspective as a researcher, but I'm a dietitian and I'm a teacher. This semester, I'll be teaching 250 students. I get questions all the time about, well, since this is natural, shouldn't it be healthful? Well, no, there's naturally occurring ingredients in foods that are very detrimental.
Is it?
So whether or not it comes from nature or whether or not it's processed doesn't equate to healthful. So we really need to look at each thing separately and based on the scientific evidence.
Do you see some natural, would be called natural alternatives to processed foods that are really, no better? I mean, sugar might be one, but it's very processed, but they just think of it as coming right off the cane. But are there any other areas where you might see that the natural is really not a
Well, where it's not as helpful, I can't come up with any off the top of my head, but I will say that much of my research is comparison of refined versions of foods to less refined versions of foods. And although on occasion, some of the less refined foods seem to be more healthful than the refined version, there are many examples in my scientific literature where the refined version didn't cause any negative repercussions compared to the less refined version.
So if we're watching out for our farmers and farm workers and the communities, and the government does a successful job at vilifying these seed oils, what are some of these the seeds or some of the crops that would be impacted by say diminished consumer demand?
Well, the majority of the oils that are available on the market would be considered seed oils. Like just if you go to the store and you buy a bottle that's labeled with vegetable oil, that is almost invariably soybean oil. The term vegetable oil in a bottle usually refers to soybean oil. If you look at the ingredient list, that's what it's going to say. That's a seed oil, and that is consumed at very high levels. And then there's so many products made from it, like mayonnaise. Most mayonnaise is made from soybean oil. Soybean oil is a healthful oil, and mayonnaise gets all sorts of bad reputation for being unhealthy, but it's made from soybean oil and water, essentially, a small amount of egg. So, lots of soybean oil, lots of plant oils or soybean oils, corn oil, canola oil. Those are the three biggest oils that are the seed oils on the market. But then there's others out there too.
For this coming year, what will some of your research be focusing on? I spent the last, I think, few weeks digging into the MAHA report. And is it something that you're going to keep your eye on as far as further government recommendations? And what might be some other areas of your research that you're either initiating or continuing with?
We're constantly asking for funding to test whether or not the dietary guidelines for Americans actually influence people's health. Just like there's very little research on the typical levels of sugar or high fructose corn syrup intake on health, there's also very little research on do the dietary guidelines for Americans influence health. So we've got a paper that will hopefully be coming out in the next month or two on whether or not the recommendation for fruits actually influences health. We found very little benefits of fruit intake, which shocked us, but at least that's a starting point. We're the first to evaluate whether or not 2 cups of fruit per day of a mixture of fruit actually influences health outcomes. We're trying to get the same kind of funding with regard to grains. So is the recommendation for total grains appropriate? Is the split of at least 50-50 whole grains versus refined grains appropriate? No studies have evaluated that. So we continue to push for that. We also have studies on the recommended levels of meats. So pork versus chicken and beef at the recommended levels and how that might influence health outcomes. So be on the lookout. We've got papers coming out on those things.
And this might not be a little bit outside your area, but one of the things that is always cited with regard to overall health, as well as the way that we process nutrition, is sleep and how much sleep people get. And there is an epidemic of sleep deprived Americans. Apparently, we fall 2 hours short on average of the amount of sleep the experts say. And of course, that again, like nutrition, it's personal. Some people need a lot. They say the president sleeps couple hours a night. I don't know if that's true, but I've known some people that can get by in 4 hours. And how do you see as far as it relates to nutrition, and is that something that could be worked into overall health recommendations?
Yeah, the data definitely are accumulating. The low levels of sleep can be potentially hazardous. Where it's really connected with nutrition seems to be those who get less sleep. They're awake more, So there's more opportunity for them to consume more calories. So people who get less sleep tend to eat more. And so that might be the biggest problem with sleep deprivation from a nutrition perspective.
And I suppose your body does most of its digesting and
Well, I don't know if there's definitely shifts that happen while you're asleep to digestive processes and metabolism.
Mhm.
But you definitely want to take advantage of all of the recovery that occurs during sleep. And some of that could be related to storage of nutrients and so forth.
Mhm. Dr. Kern, really appreciate all the work that you've done on behalf of the comments that we solicited and sent your way. And if people want to follow your work, or if they want to keep track of some of the science that you're working on, where might they find you?
Well, I'm not a big social media user. So I do have my personal web page on the San Diego State University website, so they can look me up there. My email's attached to that. So
That's great. And if anybody doesn't have an actual copy of Dr. Kern's report, you can find it at caseforconsumers.org/MAHA. And I think we answered all the questions today, and we'll be promoting your analysis and trying to get that in the hands of agencies and lawmakers and stakeholders and consumers as much as possible, so they can make sure that they're informed about not only how the process is has been ensued and how the government is going about it, but demand a little bit better. Like you said, that gold standard of scientific review, I think we really knew. Open it up for public comment, open it up for experts and researchers and scientists like yourself to weigh in. And with good data, consumer choice is meaningless unless people actually have accurate information on which to make those choices. So, Dr. Kern and everybody who joined us today, I want to thank you again, and take care, and have a wonderful rest of the week.
it's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.